In this video, we will continue to talk about painting using both vertex painting and texture painting, and we're also gonna see how we can mix them together, how we can actually create more layers into the material so that we can work with many effects simultaneously. So we saw how we can generate different types of texture and how we can paint on different layers of the material in the previous video. So we continue to add details, and essentially we are moving forward. You can see in the path of the learning part of the video course. So we started with layout, modeling, and sculpting, and we also moved from larger details into smaller and smaller details. So basically, this is what we are also doing with painting. So we already started to sculpt a lot of details in the sculpting part, but we can do the same thing using painting. So with painting, we had a lot of details that can increase the realism and the detail. So what we usually do is start with the UV editing. So it's best to have a UV map already. Otherwise, we need to unwrap and create our UV map like we did again in the previous video for this crown right here. And once we have the UVs or the UV map, we can start to paint. We can start to paint using the texture painting. So if you want to do both, like vertex painting and texture painting, you need to have nice and clean UV maps without overlapping faces. But again, we talked about this in the previous video. We also saw how we can apply logos. We can use a stencil and a color, or we can use actual images. We can print any type of applied graphics or graphic design. So we can do packaging, we can do marketing, we can do product design using painting. We can like paint texts, or we can paint numbers and so on. So we can fill out our model with a lot of tiny details, again, as we usually see with industrial design objects in real life. So we went forward from UV editing to texture paint, and then finally we arrived into shading. Now, with the shading, we can see the material like in the final stage when we render. But to do that, we need to have the color attribute, which is kind of a new attribute. So we need to change. It's like we are baking what we did with the vertex paint. And again, it's the same for texture painting, but essentially with the material, if we use texture paint, we use the same old textures that we can apply to different channels. And we also created an emissive channel, so you can create like high-tech and neon lights, like cyberpunk clothing if you want, using emission. And we also get a lot of materials from Blender Kit. So all of this stuff can be assembled together, and you can create your customized material using ready-made materials, using texture paint, using vertex paint, and color attributes node. But we're gonna see everything later on in the video. So we are now like doing a recap of everything. So another add-on, I want to give you a couple of tips for the add-ons. Now you can see here how this was material from Blender Kit, which is an add-on, so you can use it. And if you want to map it, you can of course change the mapping. So right now we are not using the UV texture. Actually, we're using a simple texture, and we are using a tiling texture, so that we don't really addressing each single part of the object, but the material is kind of being placed all over the object using the tiling. So that's another way you can do things, but this will not let you create specific details like the vertex painting and the UV texture painting. But again, you can mix everything together, and I'm gonna show you how to do that. So first of all, the tips about the add-ons. Now, the first add-on is Blender Kit. So we already talked about that. This also in the previous video. So you need to download it, install it, and then to open it up, you just type Blender, and you will find the Blender Kit add-on. And from there, you can get a lot of materials, but not only materials. You can get like single nodes or like single effects, and you can create like a Frankenstein of different pieces from different materials. and we're gonna see that also. And another helpful one, it's the node wrangler, which is kind of a set of shortcut keys that can help you to handle better the nodes in the editor, in the shading editor, in the material editor. So one of these, if you select a texture, is Control T. So when you have, well, right now this is an unwrapped texture, so it's not tileable. So this usually works with the tileable texture. Control T will help you to create a node, to create a tiling and a mapping for the material that you are working with, or the texture that you're working with. So if you do Control T, it's going to open up together the texture coordinate and the mapping. These two are really important when you work with texture because they will define the scale and the rotation and the location and so on. But right now we don't need it, again, because we are using the UV unwrap texture for the crown. So this is an object that doesn't need like a tileable material, but you can also use some mixing of tileable material and non-tileable. So let's go here in the Blender Kit add-on panel on the right. You will find it there, and we can search for a lot of different types of material. We have metals, we have fabrics, we have a lot of things we can look for. So if we type the word there on the search bar and then we click on the little eye, we can see a lot of spheres that represent all the materials that we have at our disposal using Blender Kit. So I think Blender Kit is a really amazing resource, especially if you are like a beginner, you want to study how materials are made. This is a really excellent tool. So you can see there, I got this kind of a lava effect and apply it into, well, onto the crown. So I just override the previous material, which was an unwrapped material, with this new one. Now, what if I want to keep both? So let's say that I want to keep this emissive effect of the lava, and you can see it's also like creating some lighting inside the cycles rendering engine. So this is what emissive material do. They create also light. So if I go there and I go to the shading interface, I can see how this material was made. And this is really interesting because I can study how materials are made. And you can see we have a mix also here. So you can mix texture, but you can also mix materials. So if you have two different materials, you can mix them together and you have a factor. So in the mix shader node, you have factor, and then you have the first shader, the second shader. So basically you are assigning two different materials, and with the factor, you will tell the software how you want to mix them together. If you want to use a noise texture, like in this case, you can see I changed the scale, and I can do that directly with the procedural map of the noise texture. So we can use procedural maps also, not only textures. And so little by little, we can build real complex PBR materials, which means physically based render. So these are simple materials, but you can create more layers. You can create worn out effects, you can create scratches, you can create stains, dirt, and so on. Now, there are a couple of really interesting software that you can use to do multi-layer materials. The first one, the most popular, is Substance Painter from Adobe, and the other one is Armor Paint. It's an open source software that can help you to create, again, materials, do texturing, do effects, different effects, superficial 3D effects, roughness, and so on. So let's get back here and let's start to work with this material here. Let's customize it. So right now we are mixing two different materials using a noise. So noise is a procedural map, which means that can be modified inside Blender. Otherwise, the standard texture, you need to modify them. Well, you can do something here like brightness, adjust the hue, the brightness, the contrast, but all the rest you need to do it in a graphic design application like Photoshop and GIMP or Pixar. And you will find all this software in the channel if you look for them, or you can write comments. In the comments, you can write questions and you can write suggestions. Now you can see I click on the little node icon and I went inside one of the two materials that this one is using.